Greetings, people from all over the room. Over the many years, here and there, I came up with some musical ideas, and one of those ideas was something I call the amplified circle of fifths. What I did was, in case you haven't seen my previous videos, is I took the very primitive, simple, basic circle of fifths and made it better. I think I made it better. I added data, all kinds of data. I had all kinds of goodies, and I ended up with this. In fact, I was so lazy that I waited years and years and years to make a pretty chart. I had this handwritten chart. It was really crappy. So I have this chart, and I made some videos on this to try to explain how it might be useful. And if you've seen my previous videos, I wanted to mention something that I forgot to mention. I showed how to locate tones for, let's say, a C major scale, how to locate the tones in any given quadrant. Let's put our little quadrant maker tool up here. So I showed how to find your scale tones. That was in previous videos. You can refer to that if you want to. And I showed how I used single quadrants if at all possible. Here's another one. Here's another way to make that scale. But you see, I kind of focused on the quadrant. That was an important feature in this, right? And here's two examples. But I wanted to tell you that you can map out your scale tones using more than 3 slices, using more than one quadrant. And you can do it like this. You have the bulk of your tones here, but you go outside the quadrant to catch your B. And over here you see you have your quadrant. Then you go outside the quadrant to catch your B tone. And here's the same thing for your C major scale. You go outside the quadrant if you want to. But I kind of shy away from that because it kind of messes up what I'm about to talk about in the next few videos. I want to show something that I think is really important, and something that only people who are serious about theory will be interested in. All right? So I wanted to show you that. You can go outside the quadrant, but I try not to. I try not to do that. Now, over the past 2.5 years, I've professed to try to simplify and standardize different things in music. I've been saying this repeatedly. But before I can simplify anything, I really have to do a lot of research and go into detail and do a lot of thinking. So before I can simplify anything, I actually make it much more complex. Now, if you can be patient and bear with me and get past the complex part, we can get to the simple part. So let's look at modes. And let's look at modes as they relate to this new, it's not new, it's decades old, but I'm only presenting it now. Let's see how modes relate to this amplified circle of fifths. So modes have been around for roughly 1,600 years. That's just a rough figure, all right? They've been called church modes, medieval modes, Gregorian modes, ecclesiastical modes. That's what they've been called for hundreds and hundreds of years. But I don't like that. I don't like any of those terms. I've researched it, I've studied it, and I call them Glarian modes. I call the basic 7 modes built on or from the major scale, I call them Glarian modes because Heinrich Glarian, all right, in 1547, organized everything. He put everything all together. He added some modes. He rearranged them. And he was a Swiss monk. All right, very intelligent. So he kind of cleaned stuff up. He did what I would have done. So he cleaned up stuff, and I call them the Glarian modes. Now, if you know anything about theory, even if you're a beginner, you'll know that, all right, 7 modes can be built on or from the major scale. 7 modes can be built on or from the major scale. That's basic theory. And you might also know that 7 modes can be built on or from the melodic minor scale. That's a traditional name, melodic minor. I don't use this name, but we're going to talk about it. So these are the very simple basic modes. All right. Now, if you take the modes, let's use my term, Glarian, okay? The modes, I call them Glarian. I don't use the other names. Like I said, I don't really care for any of these names, especially if you're teaching young children. If you want to eventually simplify, I would use Glarian, all right? So now here's 7 modes built on or from the major scale. And these are the names: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian, or Locrian, all right? Now, here's the post-Glarian modes. The modes that I named, they're in my book, right? And these would be the 7 modes made from my minor-major scale, or the traditional name is melodic minor, and I gave them names. Here's the names. It's hard for me to read this. Mysian, Pamphylian, Galatian, Lycian, Bithynian, Carian, and Cilician. It's hard for me to see this, so I hope I pronounced them right. Anyway, so I recognize the old original modes, and I call them Glarian modes. All right, and these are the traditional names, and I have the 7 modes built on the traditional melodic minor scale. All right, I call it minor major scale, and I gave them names so that all the 14 modes that are generally recognized and taught to at least to American young students, young children, would have names now, and they would be neatly organized. They would be beautifully organized. That's in my book. All right. Now, in the previous video, I showed how we can discover scale tones. All right. As an example, let's say you take your theoretical perfect chord that I invented. The theoretical perfect chord. Here's a B flat perfect chord. The tones would be B flat, E flat, and F. Now, and I showed in previous videos how you can discover the tones for the B flat major scale. And I also told you that within this group here, within this border, you'll find the tones for the G minor scale, is G minor 3 scale. That would be your natural minor, C minor scale, etc., etc. So when I was showing this chart, right, I showed this chart. I was trying to show you that I could discover the tones for the G major scale, all right, in one way, and in another way by moving out to outer data rings. I showed how you could find your G minor scale by discovering your B flat major scale. So this was focused on the G tone, all right? G major, G minor, and then I even showed you how to find the tones you need for the G blues scale. All right? But what I didn't say, because I thought it might be too complicated, is that, let's say, for example, here, in this group, all right, within the blue border, you have not only your tones for your G major scale, but you have all the tones you need for every mode, every one of the 7 modes built on the G major scale. In other words, all major scale derived modes, all right, the tones for all 7 major, let's use our handy tool here. All the 7 major scale derived modes, the tones for those modes will be found in this quadrant, within this border here. All right, now if that's hard to understand, let's take a look at this handy chart here. Let's say we have a G major scale, which I just showed, all right? And here's the tones. If you want to visualize the tones, here's your root, second tone, third, etc. You see, here's your tones. And you can build a mode off of this or from this scale. Let's say you build a mode on your, starting with your first tone, all right? That would be called your Ionian. And a traditional name would be G major. And my scale phrase name in my system would be G major. But you see here, you have the modes built on the different scale degrees of the scale, all right? And then you have the traditional name and my scale phrase system name. Now, the thing is here, you see when you build a mode, let's say a mode on the 3rd scale degree here, all right? That's a B. Well, see that mode, even though it's the Phrygian mode, all right? The traditional Phrygian. It's the B minor scale. This mode is actually a B minor scale. It's not a G minor. You see, when you build a mode, this mode here that we talked about, this built on the 3rd scale degree, would be B minor. If you were building one on the 2nd degree, you'd end up with an A minor scale, you see? Or down here on your 4th degree, if you started there and you build a mode, and which would turn into a scale, it would be C Lydian, not G. The only one of these that would be G is the mode built on the 1st degree of the scale. Now you have to think about that for a little bit. If you're a beginner, think about that, but it makes sense. So what I did was I showed how you can find your scale tones, and now I'm telling you, within that quadrant, within that border, all of the tones needed for the 7 modes built on or from the major scale, as in our example, all right, can be found within this border here. And they are properly named as such. Here's your mode, traditional modes built on or from the major scale. Here's the traditional names with our example of G major, all right? And then over here would be my system names. Mine don't really matter right now. The point is, I'm showing you on this chart, this is very important to segue into our next video, that all 7 modes, all right, for this major scale, all 7 modes, the tones that you need can be found within this border here. But the names ultimately will have all different tone names for those scales that result. In other words, your resulting scales will have different toning. Only the first mode here, all right, built from the G major scale, will have a G in its name. Now, I wanted to make that really, really clear because we're going to move on to something really, really neat. Something I thought was too complicated to talk about, and I was afraid because I won't get many views, but it really has to be said. It has to be said. So we're going to talk about it in the next video. Thank you for being incredibly patient, and I hope to see you in the next video.